When the skipper is sitting, he's far enough forward that his legs are up near that bench that's across the middle of the boat. And right now, he's they're kind of sitting around. Doesn't look like they're in race mode. They look like they're kind of taking a break for a minute. So he's not like pressed right up against the seat there. We'll skip forward a little bit and see where you would be when you're really racing, going upwind. So when we are just kind of sitting around, we still even then want to be keeping our body up toward the front of that boat. His forward leg is still touching the side of that seat. So now we can see that tiller sitting nice and smooth in the middle, and that extension, which right now is kind of foreshortened. You can't see exactly how long it is, but it's still about the same length as this tiller. It's going all the way up to his hand and is not in the way. If he needed to, he can pretty quickly swipe it back that way, or he can really move that tiller around wherever he needs to, right? So making sure, number one thing with the skipper is just making sure we're keeping our body far enough forward that we can always move that tiller extension around easily. We notice he's also holding on to his main sheet right there. And since we're on the same picture, kind of look at the crew as well, right? So Emily right here is sitting backwards. We learn when we're sailing FJs, going upwind, we're gonna be sitting facing backwards. It kind of makes your body fit into that little small space up in the front of the boat a little better. So we've got the boom vang, that diagonal set of lines going from the boom right here down to the mast. And if you're sitting right here backwards, then your back kind of angles in the same direction as the boom vang. If you're sitting facing forward, then anytime you lean forward, you've got that boom vang diagonal line kind of in your face, in your way. So keeping backwards makes it a little easier to work there. But also your little pulleys, your jib blocks for where the jib sheet runs through, they're very easy to reach and grab because they're kind of right in front of you instead of being like behind you just a bit. You're able to just reach right in front and grab onto those jib sheets. So you can notice she's she's sitting on that centerboard trunk. So there's still plenty of seating area on this trunk that goes up the middle of the boat. But she's also keeping a lot of her weight on her feet, and kind of see it's sort of like a squatting position, right? So we're resting ourselves on the centerboard trunk, but also feet still on the floor of the boat. We got weight very easily. We can very easily transfer our weight to them if we need to move anywhere. So that's kind of the basics. Let's move forward a little bit. I think as far as, yeah, there we go. Whoops, I just missed. Hold on. We'll watch through. We'll work through a tack with them in a little bit, but let's watch sitting still for now. So we'll pause it right around here. So you can see here we've got the skipper. If we look, we can kind of see the water. A little difficult to see. It's probably a little grainier for you as well, since it's going through zoom. But it's fairly light wind, so we can see that we're not both sitting up on the rail. We are keeping ourselves further forward in the boat, and now that Dan is on the other side, this left side, we can see the length of the tiller extension. We can see that there is actually enough room in that whole open cockpit that we do have plenty of room for that tiller and then that extension to be all the way up here, and they're not in his way. It ends right there. It's not hanging across his lap, tripping him up if he's trying to move around. So that's probably when you're first starting out, that's probably one of the biggest things that's hard to keep track of, is you'll end up kind of scooting yourself back here, and then you're kind of holding that tiller extension, and it's going like straight at a 90-degree angle from the end of this tiller to the boat here, and it's kind of pinning you in. You know, you're holding that tiller and that extension. It's kind of like pinning you into the corner, and you're not sure what to do with it. So we have to make sure that we keep our bodies far enough forward. Another thing we notice is that he's kind of sitting forward. He's sitting in. I use forward. That's a confusing word. When I say forward, I'll try to keep the term to mean toward the front of the boat. So in that case, he's not sitting. He is sitting forward, but not what I'm speaking of right now. He's scooting away. His legs are not right up against the tank, the side of the boat, right? There, he's sitting on the rail, on the tank, but is kind of moved in toward the middle. And the reason we're doing that is because if we were to scoot our body all the way out so that the back of our legs are pressed up against the seat here, now because the wind is lighter, the boat would be starting to lean toward the wind. And we know that's one of the things that we may or may not have learned yet, but that's something that we don't want to happen typically, is we don't want the boat to lean toward the wind. So we want to avoid that. If we were to move our legs all the way to the side here in this type of wind, then we'd find ourselves having to do something to make the boat stop leaning toward the wind. And unfortunately, what often happens with the newer people is that they will lean their upper body into the boat. So we might lean our head further in toward the middle of the boat, which, as far as just weight goes, would do this. It would work just fine. The only problem with that is when we are trying to sail, the farther away from the center line of the boat that our head is, the better we can feel it. So if we are sitting the way I just described, and so we're leaning our head into the middle, then we're really close to the tipping point of where the boat would be, right? If the boat is my hand, if I'm right here in the middle, if this marker is my head, the marker cap, if the boat tips a little bit, I don't feel that movement as much, right? But if my head is the marker cap now, when the boat tips, see, I'm moving a lot more. When there's for a very small motion, my head or my marker cap is going to be moving through a much bigger distance, and so you can feel that a lot better. So when your head is farther away from the center of the boat, you can feel the motion of the boat, whether it's tipping a little toward the wind, a little away from the wind. You can feel what it's doing a lot better. So we always want to make sure that, or pretty much always, our head is going to be the farthest part away from the boat. And obviously, it's not going to be like a strict extreme rule. Obviously, he's leaning in a little bit, but the main thing we're trying to say with that is we don't want to be like crouching into the boat like this. We don't want our back to go at an angle like that, right? We see some people do that sometimes, and it just kind of cuts your feel for the boat. So making sure that if we need to move weight in toward the middle of the boat to balance things and keep the boat upright, we want to shift, just kind of scoot our butt on that rail, scoot it from the outside toward the inside. We don't necessarily have to go all the way down inside the boat. Usually we're able to just kind of shift around on this rail. When we're doing that, I think I may be able to find a clip somewhere, but if not, it'll be okay. When we're doing that, we can actually only use, or we can actually only use, I guess, whatever makes it obvious that I'm not saying you're not allowed to do it the other way, but we are able to do it this way, but just using our feet and kind of sliding our butt, right? So we don't actually have to, put a hand down and lift ourselves to move. We can just kind of slide around, especially it helps when, your sailboat is a little wet, so it's a little easier to slide around. But you can play around with that, and you can find that you can slide yourself all the way in and out. And even if it's very light wind, we really want to get our body weight in the middle. The skipper might even slide in onto the seat that we can see here. So even with that, you can do by just kind of pressing down with your feet, so you've got some force, and pulling your legs toward you, which, since your feet are on the floor, they're not going to move. So you'll actually pull your whole body towards you, and you can just gently slide down onto that seat. And if you realize that maybe there's a puff of wind, the wind is building a little bit, and I need to slide back out, again, I don't need to use my hands. I can keep using my hands to, steer and do the main sheet. I can, again, just kind of push up with my feet so that I'm kind of lifting my body, and I will nice and gently slide up the rail and then onto that seat. So I can slide in and out real smoothly by just using my feet, sliding my butt. I don't have to stand up and sit down again or use my hands. So that's the skipper. That's how they're kind of moving around when we're sailing on a straight line. The crew is also going to do the same sort of stuff. They are, again, if we need to, move from the middle of the boat where we're sitting backwards, we can see that. And we can see, even when you're sitting backwards, we'll take a quick little side jaunt to explore that. Even when we are sitting backwards, we're able to pretty easily turn and see behind the jib. Remember, that's part of our job as the crew, is to look out here. We can, instead of, we're not having to like turn our head backwards, we can just kind of lean and slightly turn. So it's not as easy to see as if we were sitting forward. Sitting forward is obviously going to be a little easier to see around that jib, but when we think of all the other things that work out better when we're sitting backwards, and the fact that it's really not much more difficult to just do that little turn like that. It's not a lot of, we're not like trying to twist our head around. We can kind of twist the whole body, and we can easily see behind that jib, and it'll work out. So that's how that's kind of how we look around, right? We're just kind of turning out to the side, peering around behind there. But if we need to move around to adjust our weight when we're sailing in a straight line still, if maybe we're balancing, there's a puff or something, or maybe we were up on the rail and we need to come back in, we're going to do something we call slithering. This is kind of pretty similar to the crew, right? Or sorry, to the skipper. But the crew is going to, again, not lift their weight up and set it down. They're just going to slide along that rail. So let's actually see if I can fast forward a little bit so that we can see the other side of the boat. I think if we get this angle when they're sitting over there, we'll be able to see the crew a little easier. There we go. So that actually, we kind of were able to see that happening. So let me pause it right before they move, and we'll go like frame by frame so we can see what's going on. So when we'll take kind of the extreme example, right? They're in the middle of a roll tack. We might run through that a little bit later. But this is kind of the extreme example of the boat is tipped. So we need to move up to the high side. So we can see that Emily's on her feet. Her weight is on her feet. She's kind of stepping up there. So instead of fully standing up, we're kind of sliding. We're sliding our body weight. So again, this is kind of the extreme example. So she is kind of standing up in this case. But typically we can see we're not going to have a 45-degree angle when we're adjusting our weight. It's like 5 or 10 degrees. But we can see she's not standing up and then sitting down on the rail with her back facing that way. She's still facing, her back is still facing the front of the boat, right? So we're kind of, it's almost like a slide. Our weight is on our feet, but we're leaning our body starting almost with your shoulder right up against the rail here. And then you can slide up a little more. So now we've come off our shoulder. Now we're kind of on our side right here, leaning against the rail. And then as we push further up, going further along our side, but that way we can stop whenever we need to in a perfect adjustment, right? So it could be maybe just leaning from the middle of the boat, leaning to the rail. Maybe that was enough. Or maybe we had to go kind of slide halfway up, right? Or maybe we did have to go all the way up on the rail. But most of the time, the adjustment you'll have to make is going to be somewhere in the middle. It's not going to be, if we're coming up from the seat, we're not often going to have to come and just plunk right down on the rail. That'll overbalance us, and now we're tipping toward the wind. So we want to do that kind of slither motion where we're leaning onto the rail and then we're sliding along it on our side, not on our stomach or on our back. We're on our side, still facing the back of the boat. And then if we do end up sliding all the way up so that we're now sitting on the rail, now we can turn and be with our back facing that side of the boat. But normally it's just going to be somewhere in the middle. So that gives us basically an infinite amount of adjustments, right? We can stop at any point instead of kind of committing in our head to, I'm standing up and sitting on the rail. And if it was too much, then it was too much. And that's unfortunate. We want to be able to have that maximum amount of adjustment possible. And still keeping our weight on our feet so that if we need to hop back in the middle, we can. All right, so that is, well, it looked like I froze for a second. My head is like wagging all around. That was interesting. So that's our kind of our straight line adjustments, right? The skipper or the crew. And here we can actually see the skipper. Let me pause that for a second so that it's not, we get that dark image to go away. We can kind of see this is where the skipper's sitting in on that bench, right? He's kind of slid off the rail onto the seat. So his legs are still behind the seat. So his body is a little bit twisted, right? His lower body, his legs are almost twisted a little bit toward the back of the boat, just so his legs can go down behind that seat. But his upper body is obviously still looking forward because we always want to be able to see where we're going. So that's in the really light wind, that's kind of how you'll be sitting, rather than be way up here on the rail and the boat is really tipping toward the wind. That's really going to slow you down in the light wind, just the way that everything works. So we want to make sure that we're not leaning toward that wind. In the light wind, we even want to have maybe a little bit leaning away from the wind, leeward heel, we call it. So leeward heel, heeling to leeward, would be leaning away from the wind. Windward heel, heeling to windward toward the wind, would be leaning toward the wind. So we want to make sure that we never have windward heel, always moving some weight in. But we can see when he does this, his body's in here, and now he does have the ability to keep leaning his head back out if he needs to, so that he can see around, or he can keep that feeling for the boat, keeping his head away from the center. So that's how we'll sit, and if it's really light, and then obviously just moving out a bit more as we get more breeze or a puff comes up or whatever's going on. But that way, when thinking through how we've explained the skipper and explained the crew, that lets us, we're able to move smoothly around without big jerky movements, right? Cool, so that's straight line. Now, if we were thinking through a tack or a jibe, so we'll look at at this level, we won't go into, the real technical bits of the roll tacks. We'll just talk through the basic motion, kind of starting with, if we're not even worried about a roll tack at all, we're not doing what we just saw them do, where they make the crazy tilt over and then bring it back to upright again. Just thinking of the basic motion of the tack. So I know we have at least one person in here who hasn't been on a sailboat with us before, so we'll just kind of show basically what's going on. And probably, I think Eliza's been around, she's probably actually picked up basically what I mean. But just in case we wanted a refresher, we going upwind toward the wind, we can't point directly at it, right? So we have kind of an angle that we can sail at. So when we change from this angle to that angle to kind of zigzag upwind, we've got to turn through that somewhere around 90 degrees, right? So when we do that, that's our tack. Going downwind, we don't have quite as much restriction. We can basically go all the way straight downwind, but sometimes we do have to change sides. So we do have a smaller angle that we have to jibe through, but it still means sails come across. So we'll look at the tack. So when we're doing it, let's go through, and again, we won't really pay attention to the big roll right now, just kind of what the motion is, especially the skipper, because the big thing that trips people up when they're first starting things, right, is what do I do with that tiller and that main sheet? So the skipper's always got a hand for the tiller, hand for the main sheet. He's still holding the end there that's coming out of the pulley. So at some point during the tack, they have to switch, right? And at some point during the tack, we have to get underneath the boom, and sometimes that can be confusing in and of itself, just because it is kind of hanging out there above your head. So as we, another weird lag skip for me in my video screen. That's all right. So as we go through our tack, they are rolling the boat. So if we have not got to roll tacks just yet, we're just thinking, we're sitting here on the side, we're turning our tiller. We can see how he's turning it. He's not moving back to the hard tiller itself, still holding on the extension, just kind of pushing it away from us. And we can kind of grab that main sheet. I think this is mainly, he's kind of steadying himself as he leans out. So we don't necessarily have to go and grab right up here if we're not doing a big roll. But we go down, and when he starts to come up, let me see if I can back that up a tiny bit. I didn't stop quite where I wanted to. When we start to come up, we're going to see that we're going to move our tiller extension. We're going to push it this way across the boat. We don't want to keep it straight in line going up to the front of the boat, because that's going to be tripping us up as we try to come through. So see, he pushes it all the way across. You can even put a hand on the other side to kind of steady that tiller in the middle and steady yourself as you're stepping across. And then as we go over, notice we've waited until the boom has come onto the new side. So this whole time, he sat on the old side that he was on. he let the boom come over and just have to kind of quickly duck under it there. But that way, the whole time we're stepping across the boat and doing our swap, how we see that in a minute, he doesn't have to worry about the boom hitting him in the head because it's already gone over, right? So as far as that goes, anytime we do a tack, whether we're trying to do a roll tack or just going for a normal tack, we can kind of wait until that boom comes to the new side of the boat before we step across. Now he can do whatever he wants to without having to worry about that boom. So another thing, if I can catch it while he's moving, is that when we go across the boat, remember we always want to be looking toward the front because we always want to know where we're going. So the way to remember that is we step first with the back foot, the leg that's toward the back of the boat, toward the stern, the one that's closer to the tiller, whatever is easier to remember. We're going to step across, and that way the natural motion for our body to pivot is to go toward the front of the boat, right? So we're going to kind of pivot around so that we can sit back down on this new side. And when we sit down, there's kind of two ways we can do our tiller and our main sheet swap. You can kind of do it before you sit down, or you can do it like during or after you sit down. So if we were to do it before, right about now is when we would pass right behind our back, that main sheet and that tiller. We'll see if we can watch that here. There we go. So actually he's real quick because he is one of our better racers. But I wasn't even able to kind of get it in frame, but he's already done that quick switch. So it does take time to get used to, but eventually you can get up to this fast as well. It's pretty neat. But you see what he's done is his tiller hand has put the tiller in the main sheet hand. So he's holding the tiller and the main sheet together, and we've let go with the tiller hand. So he's kind of done it like as he's sitting down. This is kind of the way you'll see most people do it as they're kind of developing their roll tack ability. In my mind, it's kind of the easiest way to do it. Get that switch done just before you sit down, and then after you sit, then you can reach with this hand that's loose, the one that was holding the tiller. He's going to reach up and grab the main sheet. So the other way that you could do it is if you sat down and we're still in this hand holding the main sheet, but in this hand we're still holding the tiller. So your hand is kind of behind your back. If I can get myself into the screen, you kind of be sitting down like that, right? With your hand is still holding the tiller in this hand. There we go. So as you sit down, you would then take your main sheet hand and move over to grab that tiller, and you could then take your tiller hand behind your back. So it's the same motion, it's just a little delayed. You can sit down and still be controlling the tiller with a hand behind your back, and not have to do that switch. I think this is the easier way to go, what we're seeing on the screen, but there are some people that do it just fine the other way. So it's just kind of what you're able to get used to. But we're able to see that. So we do that switch, we get through, and then whether you're doing a big roll and flatten like they did, or whether we're just doing a nice little flat tack, we are going to make sure we move ourselves where we need to. So we saw he got way up on the rail to do that big flatten, but then he realized that if he stayed there, then he would get a whole big roll toward the wind. And like we said, we don't want to roll the boat toward the wind. So we want to make sure that if we realize we got too much weight out, we're going to scoot ourselves in as far as we need to. It looked like he had to go all the way in on that seat, but you might just have to move a little bit. So obviously depends on what kind of wind speed we have. So that's kind of the two big things I would say about tacking, figuring out how to spin around is the one, when we're going, we'll wait until that boom comes to the new side so that when we're moving across the boat, switching sides, we don't have to worry about ducking under that boom in the middle. It's already gone by us. It's already on the side we just left, so that we have free room to do whatever we need to. And the second thing being, when we cross the boat, we're pushing our tiller extension, where our tiller extension is going before we do, right? We saw Dan put that extension all the way across, and then he moved his body towards it. And doing that will make sure that it's out of our way. It's not going to trip us up in the middle when we are trying to switch around. So those are probably the two biggest things for the tack. So see if I can move forward and find some jibes. I think we had some further in, going downwind. Here we go. So jibing is going to be, oh, and you know what we didn't do? We didn't look at what the crew does during attack. Let's back up real quick for that. So again, pretty similar stuff, especially if we're doing a roll tack, we're really coordinating our body motion. But even if we're not doing really a roll tack going on, that we still are going to want to kind of move together. So when the skipper needs to move to the new side, the crew is going to move with him. You want to kind of keep your motions coordinated, right? So the crew doesn't have to move quite as far as the skipper because they are kind of centralized in the boat anyway. But you know, you might be sitting on the rail or hiking if there's more wind, so you might have to move just as much as them. So normally during attack, we're still going to be facing backwards, right? So we're going to be moving to, if you're doing a roll tack, you're going to move down with the skipper as well as up. If you're not doing a roll tack, then your main job is just to be ready to switch that jib over, right? So as we go through, we'll see she gets down to help Dan roll the boat. Meeting will end in 10 minutes. Cool. All right. What was I saying? Oh yeah. So sorry, some little notification popped up, distracted me. But so she's helping him roll. If we're not rolling, then we'll just kind of stay in the middle there. But what we want to pay attention to is not letting this jib kind of flap around the whole time. So we see here that we're still holding it in. It's at this point, it's kind of on the wrong side because now the wind is blowing from this side. We've moved through the wind. But we're doing that so that we make sure it's not flapping around, because just about now we're going to come up and she's now let go of that jib sheet right there and is now pulling in on the new jib sheet, which is in the pulley right here behind Dan's knees. So if I can catch there, now's about when we pop over, and again, weight is on her feet. So she's able to pretty easily move from one side to the other. And she's using her arm to grab onto the rail, the side of the boat, and help pull herself up if we're doing a roll tack. But so weight on the feet and using the arms to help us pull up. With her other arm, she's got that, she already had that jib sheet in her hand, is able to pull it as she moves. So she doesn't even have to do much of an arm motion, just her body moving up to the new side will pull that jib in nice and smooth. And then again, if we realize that we've come up a little too far and we're going to make the boat lean toward the wind, then we'll hop back in. So she got way up on that rail, but then moved back into the boat so that she'd be able to balance it. So I think a couple of the keys there are, we remember, even if we're not doing a roll tack, the big job is moving that jib. So we're going to kind of have a hand on each jib sheet as we go into the tack. We've got the one that on the old tack, this is the one that she was trimming with. On the new tack, this is what she's going to pull in. So got each one in her hands. They're right in front of her because we're sitting backwards, so easy to grab onto. And she's going to pull all the extra out of this one that's now the one she's using, but that was the unused one before they tacked. So she'll pull all the extra, all the loose bit out of that, all that she can out of this side, so that when it's time to pull it over, there's only a little bit left to bring in, so that the jib is in and working for us. So that's the one big thing. And then the other is just remember your weight kind of stays on your feet mostly all the time, right? So instead of, when we first start learning to sail, first get in a boat, we're kind of using that seat as a seat, right? Our weight is kind of on our butt, but we're getting used to the idea that we are, we're supporting ourselves. We're still sitting down, but our weight is really on our feet. Maybe the bigger part of it is that we're in kind of that squat position rather than a normal sitting position. Our feet are under us, not out in front of us, so that when it's time to move, we can pretty quickly move through there. Cool. So that's the skipper and the crew, different jobs in the tack. So we'll move ahead and find a jibe that we can look at. So we're heading down, and right there's something we can point out. When we're turning to go downwind, when we're racing, the crew is going to turn around and they will now face the front of the boat. And the reason is because now the boom vang isn't really a problem. It's out to the side, so that's not in our face. And when we're using this jib, we're actually going to not pull it through the block, through the pulley. When we're going downwind, we're going to be holding it by the actual jib sheet, the rope itself, out to the side of the boat. So we have to be able to see it, because the skipper is now really paying attention to the mainsail. So they don't have a lot of time to look at that jib and make sure it's trimmed the right way, in the same sense that they do going upwind. So going upwind, the crew faces backwards because they fit better there. Going downwind, the crew faces forward because they have to use that jib. All right, so in a little bit, we'll be rolling through a jibe. So we'll let the video go till then. So again, just moving our weight around where we need to. And now a lot of the weight balance is done with the skipper. So the crew sometimes does end up in a more of a sitting position, but still trying to focus on keeping able to move pretty easily. So we can see again, like we talked, skipper kind of moves anywhere he needs to on that rail. So right now he's real in close to the middle. If he were to scoot it any farther, he'd probably have to move down onto that seat. But when we come to a jibe, we'll notice one thing that happens is that before the skipper goes to the jibe, he's going to grab onto his main sheet again through the big pulley. And we want to always be holding onto the edge of that main sheet, right? We never want to completely let go of it. Some people do, but even if you have, you do want to pull it back in, because during the jibe, we're going to do that tiller and main sheet swap, just like we did on the tack. So we'll see that in a minute. And I think, oh, I skipped too far. All right, so coming into a jibe, we're going to start turning down. Here we go. So again, they're doing the big rolls, because they're one of the more advanced boats we got out there. But whether you're working on those roll jibes, there's no time. Nobody's going to say you can't work on them. You got to learn at some point. But whether you're working on them or not, even if you're just doing a normal flat jibe, there's a couple things here we can look at. So we're still using our body weight. We've talked through some of these different sessions about we can use the tilting of the boat to help it turn. So the fact that we're tilting the boat down towards the water on this right side means that the boat wants to turn to the left. So it's helping the boat turn into that jibe. The next thing is that as we're going through, we'll again, very similar to the tack, even though a few things are working a little differently, but we are still waiting for this boom to come all the way to the new side. So now it's totally out of the way. We had to just real quick, one little duck to get underneath it, and then now it's totally out of the way. It'll never bother us again. Now we're able to go across the boat. And again, doing that tiller and main sheet swap right there behind the back. It makes it look nice and casual. But as long as we're keeping our body up toward the front of that boat, toward that seat right there, then we've got the tiller and the main sheet out of our way. So we can easily cross that boat. We push the main sheet, or the tiller, sorry, we pushed the tiller extension across first, so it was out of our way. We did our little swap, and then we're able to sit right back down. This hand is able to grab that main sheet again. So we notice during both watching these tacks and watching the jibes, there's no point when we're like standing up in the middle of the boat for a long time. We want to go, if we can, we want to go straight from sitting down on one side to sitting down on the other with not a lot of time in between. A lot of the times when we're still learning, we're a little newer. It sometimes feels a little more stable if we're sitting up or standing up, right? We think, I can move my weight around a lot more quickly if I need to when I'm standing. But it's actually going to end up that it will be a little more unstable for us if we're standing up. If we have a little wave bump us while we're doing our jibe, or maybe the motorboat's going by and they make a bigger wake and the boat's bouncing a little bit. It's a lot easier to get off balance if you're standing up in the middle of the boat for a while, especially if you're preoccupied with trying to do a switch, trying to do that main sheet and tiller switch. If you're focused on that and not looking at the wave that's coming, you could really easily end up kind of tripping, or even if you don't fall, I'm sure you've had that feeling where you kind of stumble a little bit. You're like, whoa, that wasn't good. So trying to go straight from sitting over to sitting on the new side.